Chapter 3 is called Audiovisual Translation as a Site of Interventionist Practice. So it examines what's happening with audiovisual translation from more or less the mid-1990s. That is the point where more or less the digitization of audiovisual texts, of audiovisual commodities began. So whereas in chapter 2 we talked about how audiovisual translation worked at a time that we described as the era of mass media, what we are talking about in this chapter is a very different context of media content production and consumption. We are now talking about a context where we are operating under what some specialists would call a post-industrialist networked economy. So basically the consideration of audiovisual translation as a side of interventionist practice is something that is driven by developments in communication technology and the consequences of this process, which I'll try to outline very quickly. Because of these advances in communication technologies, there have been important changes in the way we conceptualize and practice audiovisual translation. These changes are very widespread, and I will cover them both here and in chapter 7 in more detail. And also in terms of consequences, I think it's necessary to highlight the shift from what used to be the linear models of consumption and distribution of media content to the current non-linear models. So what this means is that because of the ubiquity of internet, because of the increasing availability of streaming media platforms, for example, it is increasingly easier for the viewer to decide what they want to watch, when they want to watch it, and how they want to watch it. And in this case, of course, that means how those audiovisual texts need to be translated. There are a number of important implications of this process for audiovisual translation. One of them is, of course, the fragmentation of national audiences, which used to be for decades a very important concept or at the heart of a lot of scholarship on audiovisual translation. We are witnessing a dematerialization of space. Audiovisual content can flow, can travel very fast, and that means that audiences now are changing because they are no longer clustered around that concept of notion, and instead we have new forms of transnational grouping, of people who are geographically dispersed but share interests, share agendas, and then they become part of these new audiences that in this chapter I call audienceships. So the shift from the traditional concept of audience to the new concept of audienceship is one that receives substantial attention. The advances of technology have also had other consequences apart from the emergence of these fluid and decentralized audienceships. On the one hand, technologies have facilitated the involvement of viewers and media consumers in what experts called the processes of co-creation. So they intervene in the process of production of media content in different ways, one of them being the production of translations of those audiovisual texts by obviously, in many cases, non-professional translators. And secondly, the fact that these new translation agencies, these new people who are becoming interested in translation, don't translate in isolation. They translate as part of network communities, as part of a participatory culture. But most importantly, these are communities that tend to be engaged in a number of ways. These are cyber cultures that are either politically, ideologically, or aesthetically engaged, with specific agendas that they want to promote and move forward. And it is precisely because of the impact that these agendas have on the way they translate that I've called the chapter Audiovisual Translation as a site of interventionist practice.